Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker. With me, as always, we have Kyle Cushman. In today's episode, we are bringing you up to date with open wheel action for IndyCar and Formula One, as both series are in action this weekend for different periods of time for their schedule. IndyCar wraps up their season this weekend in Long Beach with Alex Palou set for his first IndyCar title. It is within his grasp. We'll see if he can execute that on Sunday with an unbelievable season here for Chip Ganassi Racing, with Pato O'Ward being right on his heels here as of late, but Alex Palou has just been really, really consistent so far this season. And then for Formula One, it's the Russian Grand Prix. Yes, I know it's the Russian Grand Prix. Not everybody's too excited, but we are expecting a wet weather qualifying here for the Saturday, and then we'll see what happens on the Sunday when a couple of big names are going to have to work their way up to the field, with Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen both taking grid penalties for new power units. So we'll have a couple of news and notes to get to in today's episode, and then we'll just kind of preview the weekend for both of those series as they get underway in their respective countries. So before we get into all of that, how are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing good. Yeah. Fun weekend coming up with the IndyCar championship finale coming up here at Long Beach. We are going to get that Long Beach Grand Prix. Was in question all year long, but all things point towards the race going on, which is very, very exciting. Such a great IndyCar season coming to a close with two young guns, future stars, current stars, even going head to head for that final race. Alex Palou has the championship in his grasp, just kind of needs to finish decently and he'll wrap up that championship. But what I do know is that Pato O'Ward is going to be a treat to watch coming up this weekend. So cannot wait for the IndyCar side of things, and even for the Russian Grand Prix. As terrible as it's been in years past, we're going to get a wet weather weekend, and it looks like it's going to be raining pretty heavily all weekend on the Saturday and potentially the Sunday as well, up to 70% for the Sunday, with guys coming from the back as well. So even for a Russian Grand Prix, a lot to keep an eye on coming up this weekend. So looking forward to this weekend in open wheel racing.
The Belgian Grand Prix has given me a bit of pause in terms of how much rain I want to see. Now I'm kind of scared, but we shouldn't expect anywhere near what we saw at Spa a couple of weeks ago for F1. So yeah, looking forward to the Russian Grand Prix nonetheless. If there's some rain that can spice things up, let's see what happens there. But let's look at the news and notes for today. We've got to start us off, the 2022 Miami Grand Prix for Formula One has been officially announced in terms of the date it's taking place. It'll be on Mother's Day weekend from May 6th to 8th. That's the same weekend as NASCAR's Darlington race, which is expected to be their throwback weekend as well. So going to be interesting to see the viewership numbers that weekend for motorsports in North America. But Miami has their date set, and we'll expect the 2022 F1 calendar here over the next couple of months. They've been trying to really figure out, they haven't even finalized the 2021 schedule yet. So let's not push it in terms of getting the full 2022 one with so many moving parts with this pandemic. But good to have a date set here for F1's newest edition here, Kyle, as Miami is definitely the talk of the town in terms of how it's going to look for next season.
Yeah, and it's going to be a star-studded event because it's an off weekend for IndyCar as well.
Yeah.
So I imagine you're going to be getting a lot of guys going over there, just given some of the Formula One ties. And it's really great because that means that each weekend in May, we're going to have a significant open wheel event in North America, starting things off on the 1st of May with Barber Motorsports Park for IndyCar. The weekend following, IndyCar's off. We have the Miami Grand Prix, a new thing, a new street circuit. Expectations will be tempered in terms of what the actual racing product is going to be like, because we just don't know for the 2022 car and kind of the layout that they're going for Miami. But then following that, we've got the Indianapolis road course for IndyCar, and then we're right into Indy 500 qualifying, leading up to the greatest day in motorsports to round out the month of May on the 29th there. So very, very exciting month of May coming up next year for open wheel in America, when you look at a packed schedule for IndyCar. And then on the one off week that you have for IndyCar, oh yeah, let's just throw in a brand new Formula One race. So very, very excited for the month of May coming up next year.
Yeah, you'd imagine that the Canadian Grand Prix could be in around that timeline as well if they're coming overseas.
If they keep it the same kind of timeline, it'll be in that same kind of first or second week of June, which has been for forever.
Yeah, that would make sense. It just figured in terms of if they want to limit travel or whatever, if they want to shake things up, but that's probably the most likely scenario. But looking forward to seeing Miami make their debut next season. Glad we have a date, and we'll look forward to that on the May 6th to 8th weekend for Mother's Day. Also, Haas has officially finalized their 2022 F1 driver lineup, as well as Aston Martin, with both of them staying intact from this season. Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin, obviously at his home race this weekend, is staying put with Haas for next season, and then Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll will stay with Aston Martin for 2022 as well. So good to see those two are staying put with those driver lineups for next season, and that officially now leaves only one spot left on the 2022 driver lineup vacancy list at Alfa Romeo. Who's going to join Valtteri Bottas as his teammate for next season? We'll wait and see on that as the situation unfolds, but glad to have those two guys, or at least all four of those guys, signed up for next season and officially finalized.
Yeah, not much to add there. We knew that these were coming for a long time. They'd been confirmed on multi-year contracts previous to this. Yeah. It's just kind of the formalization of officially announcing those. So no surprises there. Haas sticking with the young lineup. They had both locked up to multi-year contracts. We knew this year was going to be a bit of a write-off, just kind of getting them adjusted to the level of competition of Formula One next year with the development going into the 2022 car. That's more of where we're going to see where things are at for Mick Schumacher and Nikita Mazepin. And then for Aston Martin, this year is kind of similarly has been a write-off. It hasn't been that same kind of level that they expected after last season. The low rake, high rake stuff really impacted their program. They've taken a big step back. I imagine that they put a lot of emphasis into this next generation car, just given comments from Lawrence Stroll, them having a 5 to 6 year timeline to be title contenders. And a big part of that is going to be starting next season on the right foot. So promising driver partnership there between Sebastian Vettel and then the promising, of course, Lance Stroll, who's had flashes but has lacked consistency. Vettel, who's had flashes this year, but it's either been really good or really bad, and trying to find that middle ground as well. So two driver lineups and two teams especially that I'm definitely interested to see how they perform going into next season.
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks surrounding those two teams and how their performance is going to look for next year. So having the same driver lineup, we'll see if that pays dividends for them in the long run next season. And then the next one here is a little bit of a fun one. It's a kind of an inside joke here for the sport media program. Netflix CEO Reed Hastings reportedly told German outlet Der Spiegel that he considered bidding for the F1 live media rights in the next bidding era when it comes up. Pretty big news that Netflix would be looking at something like this for North America and, globally, to try and get the rights to Formula One. Of course, Drive to Survive has done exceptionally well for them on their streaming platform. What that means for them to go into live media rights is a fascinating prospect for live sports specifically as well. But Reed Hastings, a guy that we've studied much about, Kyle, is definitely making a bit of a splash in the news. I see you grimacing when I make that comment, but I mean, it is all fun and games with Reed Hastings. Shout out to our first year business class. But yeah, what are your thoughts on this one? This is a little bit of an intriguing one for future prospects for the sport.
Well, I don't know what your timeline you are on because Reed Hastings was last year. But anyways.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
I don't know how you did that. But,
no, I thought it was from the first year.
No. You're out to lunch on this one. But
out to toast.
Yeah, there it is. I wanted to see if you would catch that.
Of course.
But no, not to get too inside baseball on this, but the prospect of a Netflix or an Amazon or a Google getting into live streaming and buying rights is something that's been kind of whispered about, talked about for a while, but nobody's kind of gone through and gotten the full package. We've seen tidbits here and there. We've seen NFL games on Twitter, on Twitch, on all these kind of things, but we haven't seen a full commitment from anybody to buy up a big block of games and have them exclusively. In this case, races. It wouldn't be globally or anything like that. That's just not how it works. It would be geo restricted. It would be either in Canada or in the United States or in certain areas that they would be getting these rights. I know in Canada, at least TSN re-up just into this season. So that wouldn't be something in the short term. I can't remember how much term is left for the ESPN, I believe it is, rights deal that they have in the States. So some stuff still up in the air as to what the timeline would be for Netflix. But just look at what a streaming service and DAZN has done recently. They've got a footprint in lots of different countries all over the world, and they've got a very different footprint all over the world. There are some places that they have NFL coverage, where they have Premier League coverage. Yep. There are some races that DAZN already has stuff like Champions League, as you mentioned, but there are places that DAZN already has racing in terms of Formula One and stuff like that. So it's not like this is a new concept of having Formula One on an exclusive streaming streaming platform or stuff like that, but having Netflix be heavily involved, of course, in the production of Drive to Survive, which has driven up interest in North America specifically, and having the prospect of them potentially having even more of a partnership in terms of actually having live races there is definitely a can of worms that I'm sure the networks don't want to open, but I'm sure we'll get closer and closer to kind of realizing what that kind of future is in the coming years when these rights start to end and negotiations start to begin.
Yeah, negotiations for this stuff. Like, I feel like there's long-term contracts in place for a lot of these motorsports right now, at least. IndyCar just re-upped with NBC for a couple of seasons. NASCAR is continuing on with NBC for a couple of years for the second half of their seasons, at least until I think 2024.
So just to check, at least for Canada here, TSN has the Formula One rights through the 2024 season. So that's something that you're looking 2-3 years down the road. Yeah. And I'll quickly check here to see what the F1 contract's like in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear the prospect of Netflix bidding for F1. I mean, this is something that it wasn't even on their radar, you would think, 3 years ago before they released the first season of the show. And then you look at the massive undertaking and the massive popularity that it's shown worldwide, really, but specifically North America, and getting the numbers and viewership increased weekly. And it's done well. We're still awaiting for the North America stint for this season with Mexico and the United States. And then, of course, Brazil a little bit later on with the America stints, how those numbers are going to look at when they're afternoon races, when more people can watch and aren't, so bothered to get up so early in the morning, specifically for the West Coast, but also for the East. It's still relatively early, about 9 a.m. on a Sunday. So fascinating stuff with Netflix. But what do you have, if you have anything for the ESPN?
Yeah. So the United States one is the one that I think they'd be looking at, because that contract is set to end at the end of the 2022 season. So that would be something that they would potentially be looking at negotiating for, bidding on. I don't know if Formula One would want to go completely away from traditional TV, but we know, of course, Liberty Media is definitely forward thinking, and just the interest level, the young demographic, there could be a lot of boxes that check off a potential Netflix partnership. I don't know how realistic it is just yet, but I can definitely say that somebody with the amount of stock that a CEO of Netflix has, and Reed Hastings, definitely isn't saying that comment without any kind of intent behind what a certain plan is, or just to kind of shake up the market or see interest, those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely. Just a fun little tidbit that came out earlier this week. I believe it was from Adam Stern that was reported, but of course it was from Stern.
How I led things off by saying we're not going to get too inside baseball before we got very, very inside baseball.
Yes, we did. Next up, we have IndyCar stuff. We talked about Romain Grosjean a couple of weeks ago that this move was going to happen, and now is official by the team. Romain Grosjean will move to Andretti Autosport next season, full-time on a 2-year contract, and he will replace Ryan Hunter-Ray in the number 28. He will have full sponsorship from DHL as well. So really big news there for Romain Grosjean, who has exceeded and surpassed expectations with flying colors this season in his rookie year. The fact that he's even within the race for Rookie of the Year against Scott McLaughlin, who's run the entire season with ovals.
Well, it's only three races more.
It's still
the 2 Texas races and then double points at Indy. So it's still an impressive
accomplishment for Romain Grosjean. I don't know if anybody saw that he would come to acclimated with the IndyCar car this quickly, and he's done absolutely incredible. I mean, he got a podium last weekend at Laguna Seca. Like, that is really impressive stuff, and he had to work for that one as well. So he's just so impressive right now after everything he's gone through in the past less than 12 months, personal wise and obviously racing wise as well. He's expected to make his full a commitment known, as he's going to move to the United States with his family as well in anticipation for this new deal as well. So we're looking forward to seeing Grosjean around the paddock week in and week out, and we'll see him on the ovals next season full time as well. Going to go for the IndyCar Championship. So he's a guy that you're going to want to watch for next year, especially more so with him. And I can't wait to see him in the Indy 500. That's going to be an impressive showing there, I can imagine. So him getting in Andretti Autosport equipment as well is going to be fascinating to see how much of an increase in performance he can maybe get with the resources that team has. So your thoughts, Kyle? Again, we've talked about it before, but now that it's officially confirmed, Romain Grosjean on a 2-year deal to Andretti Autosport.
Yeah, I won't dive in too much because we've already talked about it. You can go and check out our initial thoughts in the video on the channel here. But I think the more interesting aspect is that DHL is staying on as a full-time sponsor there. They're a global brand. They're not just American. So having a driver like Romain Grosjean step into that seat, I think probably enticed them to stay back, to have somebody with kind of the global recognition of Grosjean that can help out their global brand as well. So it's a big get for Andretti Autosport. They were looking to shake things up. Ryan Hunter-Reay was at one point the team leader there, an IndyCar champion, an Indy 500 champion, but his performances have dipped off of late. And Andretti, kind of their performances as a whole have dipped as of late. So looking to shake things up. We know that the 29 seat will also be vacated almost certainly for Devlin DeFrancesco as well. So a big shakeup at Andretti going into next season. And Grosjean's going to be one of those guys to watch as a potential new title challenger for sure.
Yeah, definitely. There's going to be a lot more IndyCar news coming over the next week or so after the season finale this weekend at Long Beach. So we'll bring that to you next week in next week's episode. But and then the last bit of news here today, Callum Ilott, he's been running the last 3 races here for Juncos Hollinger Racing in the number 77. He's going to continue that relationship full-time next season, as he's not obviously secured an F1 ride for next season, finished second in F2 last season. Mick Schumacher did not get the F1 call-up for 2021, still doesn't get it for 2022, so he's going to put his efforts elsewhere and come to North America for IndyCar and see what he can do over here. He's had a couple of rough stints in the first couple of races. It's been spun a couple of times in practice and in the morning warm-up, but nonetheless, it's going to take a little bit of time for him to learn, and we'll expect some good things from Callum Ilott next season. We expected this kind of to happen once they committed to 3 races to end the season here, but good to see that Callum Ilott's going to have a full-time ride somewhere and he can focus entirely on something and maybe try and get back into the F1 conversation if something does arise for 2023, Kyle.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about this one. Juncos is a team that has had their moments in the past in IndyCar. Of course, the biggest one being Kyle Kaiser bumping Fernando Alonso from the Indy 500. Which is still such an incredible story, but they haven't really put together a full-time program yet. They took a lot of this season off, a lot of last season off to try and build up the program, get assets ready to go full-time for 2022. And we've kind of seen that as a result at the end of the season, just trying to test things out and get set for next season. It's not a program that you would look at as being one of the front runners going into the last 3 races of the season, with everybody else having all that time earlier in the year to test things out, know what works, what doesn't, and also have drivers that are familiar with the car. So I couldn't care less about the results at the end of the season. But Callum Ilott is a supremely talented driver. He went up there and challenged with the likes of Mick Schumacher, Yuki Tsunoda, guys that are currently on the Formula One grid, and finished ahead of Yuki Tsunoda last year. Probably should have been in an F1 seat last year if it was based off of, or this season, if it was based on merit, but didn't have the funding to do so. Was a test driver this year for Alfa Romeo, looking like they're going to go elsewhere and probably bring in some more money with a Guan Yu Zhou or something like that into next season. So taking his career into his own hands, I'm sure he'll probably keep some Ferrari ties where there can be some kind of sports car racing or something like that throughout the season as well, which a lot of IndyCar drivers do anyways. But for Ilott going to a bit of a new team, it's an established team, but a new team going for the full championship next season, and very excited to see what he can do as he starts to come to grasp with the car, come to grasp with these tracks, because when he does, he's definitely somebody that I could look at as a top prospect to maybe move up the grid to some better teams in the near future as well.
Yeah, if he doesn't get the IndyCar, the F1 call, then you look at maybe something over here in North America getting promoted.
Yeah, not to be too down on it, but the the Formula One thing is done for Ilott. That there's a very slim percentage of a chance that that's going to happen at this point.
That's unfortunate for him, because he was somebody that, we talked about, and a lot of people in the sport have looked at for many years as he made his way up to the system and through the ranks, that he could be a potential, world champion, if you want to look at that. Or
that's a bit extreme, but
could be, but anybody that does as well as he did in F2 for a little bit there, that you could see that they'll have the prospect of making their way if the right situation came along. I'm not saying that
I won't attach myself to that comment. Okay, is what I'll say.
Okay, fair enough. But he was a guy that people were looking at for an F1 seat for quite a few years, and it didn't quite come to fruition in the way that he hoped, obviously. But he's found a new landing spot over here in IndyCar, so we wish him all the best this upcoming weekend at at Long Beach, and then we'll preview next season when that comes around. It's a longer off season for IndyCar than any other motorsport, really. So feels like it goes by extremely quick this season, and it has so far in 2021.
It's the best grid. It's the most exciting championship, and they've got 17 races and a 6-month off season. It sucks.
Yeah, it does. But yeah, that'll do it for the news and notes for today's episode. Let's look ahead to the upcoming weekend here now, Kyle, the Russian Grand Prix. There's a lot of different things to kind of look at this weekend. We talked in a dedicated episode in terms of an F1 roundup last week, where we talked about the driver moves for next season, finalized all that stuff. And then we also talked about the championship battle as the season kind of winds down here into its final couple of months. This is going to be a big turning point. The points are going to go back in the favor of Lewis Hamilton if he's able to get the full race victory, which you imagine so, given the comments that Valtteri Bottas has made over the course of this weekend so far, where he said he'd be willing to take one for the team and let Lewis Hamilton win the race. Even if Bottas wins pole here on the Saturday, which he could do. This is a track that suits Bottas's style much more than Lewis Hamilton's. And he has performed very, very well here in his time with Mercedes. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if, Bottas maybe wins pole, but then eventually something happens where Hamilton gets an overcut, an undercut, whatever the strategy may be, where it lets Hamilton win the race here on the Sunday. This should be an easy 1-2 for Mercedes here at the Russian Grand Prix. This is a track that they've dominated. No other manufacturer or constructors ever won at a Russian Grand Prix than Mercedes. And that includes back in the 1910s, I believe. It was a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts going into this weekend? Mercedes is clearly the favorite. Verstappen starting from the rear of the grid, so they don't really have to worry about him. Perez seems to be a little bit off the pace again this weekend, which leaves that kind of final podium spot up for grabs if Verstappen can't quite make his way up to the field, which is sometimes difficult to do at Sochi with the overtaking.
Yeah, the big wild card, of course, is the weather. And it's one thing to start from the back and come up through the grid in the dry. It's a whole different beast to just maintain in the wet weather. And so I know a lot of people have the bitter taste in their mouth from the Belgian Grand Prix, but that's something that's a once in a decade type situation. I'd be very surprised if we go into this weekend and we have another catastrophe like that. But that's the big question. Will it make it easier to come up through the grid, given the difference in quality of car, the difference in quality of driver? Will it also make things more difficult, on the other hand, in trying to make those overtakes, being at the back, having the lack of visibility, all these kind of things? I could easily see it going both ways. I do think that even though it is the Russian Grand Prix, it's usually boring, all these kind of things, the wet weather aspect will spice things up, whether just from the qualifying aspect or otherwise. And I'm fascinated to see how this is going to play out because you've got two very solid drivers starting from the back this weekend. In cars that look to have pretty solid race pace as well. So this is definitely not going to be your typical Russian Grand Prix where it's going to be a Mercedes runaway. If it goes as they expect it to, I think Mercedes has the upper hand for sure. But given the forecast, given all the extenuating circumstances, I definitely don't think it's going to be a walk in the park.
No, it's going to be an interesting one because if it is a dry race and a wet qualifying, which it basically is seemingly that it's going to be a wet qualifying, the race is a little bit more up in the air in terms of what it's going to look like.
It's still 70% on the Sunday.
But we know how F1 does with the weather, where it sometimes rains after the checkered flag has fallen. But mean,
it's been raining there like the entire week. So
it's been pretty crazy. Like if you saw the flooding images that came out of there in the paddock and stuff, it was pretty surreal. But yeah, this upcoming weekend, it's going to be fascinating because if it's a wet qualifying, you could have some guys overachieve in that and then fall back in the race pace, which could present the opportunity for the likes of Leclerc and Verstappen to really try and make that charge up to the field a little bit easier. You think of somebody like George Russell specifically after his incredible performance at Spa. If it's in the wet, you expect him to maybe make a Q3 appearance if it comes down to that. And then from there in the race, if he actually does go ahead in the dry, then the Williams is probably going to fall back. But if it's in the wet again, George Russell could hold his own and get some more points this weekend. So there's a lot of different things that you can look at this upcoming weekend. If it's a wet qualifying and then a wet race or a dry race, there's a lot of different variables that these teams have to consider. But, Verstappen was already going to have the 3-place grid penalty after the Italian Grand Prix anyways. Let's take the let's just get it over with in one foul swoop and have to just start from the rear. It's not their best track anyway, so it's not like they were going to probably win if they didn't have any grid penalties this weekend anyway. So this is probably a good decision. Would you have said that they should make the engine change this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, if you have the grid place penalty, just take it on the chin and go all the way. There's no reason not to.
Yep. Hamilton still has to do his though. So very curious to see when he will decide that is the right time for him to make that switch, and what is he able to do when he makes that switch for that power unit. It's going to start at the rear. Can he salvage something similar to what Verstappen could maybe do this weekend? The key for Max is that he's got to try and get as many points as he can and just avoid anything that happens on lap one, especially into that, I guess, second corner after the kink there in the straightaway. It's always chaotic there. Somebody always runs into something. And then either they try and go wide there and then they hit that stupid opening there with the 10,000 different arrows pointing where you should go. Or
they'll probably make a slight change to it after last year though.
Maybe, but I don't know if you saw the practice images. It looks still pretty sketchy through there. If it's in the wet specifically.
I mean, it's up to the drivers to also make it, because it is supposed to inhibit you and put you back in line roughly where you would have been. But after last year, we got a little bit of chaos on that first lap. So
definitely, but I'm cautiously optimistic for the Russian Grand Prix this weekend. Let's talk about IndyCar. This is going to be an exciting championship finale. Long Beach is always an entertaining track. And for Alex Palou, he's just got to keep his nose clean. This is just one where you try and salvage like a 10th place finish. And that's really all you need to do at the end of the day, no matter what Pato O'Ward really does. So with that kind of mentality, he should be fine. Just has to go out there and execute a clean race. And Pato O'Ward's going to try his damnness. I'm sure of that. We've seen that so far this season. Has really, after an unbelievable rookie season, he's really had a coming out party again this year for a championship bid. I think he's been super impressive. Palou has just come out of nowhere here this year to be the front runner for the championship. I don't think anybody really saw that going into the final race this year after he won the first one back in at Barber Motorsports Park to open the season. Like, we thought, okay, that's great for him. How long can he really sustain this? And he's absolutely done that the entire year, apart from a couple of incidents that have derailed that even more impressive title bid, where he was running basically in the top 10, I feel like, every single weekend. So your thoughts going into this final race for IndyCar, Kyle? It's come really quick. It feels like the season went over with the blink of an eye, but Alex Palou in prime position to score his first IndyCar championship.
Yeah, Palou has been a revelation this year. He was very, very good on the road courses last year. Looking at the two Road America results, having the first career podium there in his second IndyCar road course race. The question was going to be about the consistency and could he kind of hold his own on the ovals, and he's done that this season. He's been even better on the road courses than we anticipated, and he's going into this finale at Long Beach, which for starters wasn't even supposed to be the finale, with basically his own destiny in his own hands. If he has a clean race, if he finishes, I believe it is top 12, it doesn't matter if Pato O'Ward gets maximum points, it's still going to be Palou's championship. So he's done exactly what he needed to do the last couple of weeks after the Gateway and then Indianapolis Grand Prix shenanigans that happened there. Yeah. Won at Portland and then went out and got the second place finish at Laguna Seca, held on there at the end, which is exactly what he needed to do to set himself up very well going into Long Beach. The pressure isn't on him. The pressure is on Pato O'Ward to go out and get those maximum points to try and put Palou in a difficult position. But all Palou's got to do is do what he's done all season long, and that's finish the race. And if he's doing that, it's probably well inside the top 10. I believe this season he's got 3 DNFs or 4 DNFs, which is very, very low over the season. And when he has finished, it's almost exclusively been inside the top 7 or top 8. So Palou, if he just does this thing this weekend, I'm sure it'll end up with a championship in the hands of the Chip Ganassi team. But Pato O'Ward would definitely not go down without a fight.
24 years old, man. Like, that is just crazy what he's been able to accomplish so far this season. And the credit goes to him and that entire 10 team where they've just taken off this year, stepping into kind of a new number here, of course. replacing Felix Rosenquist there. So, I mean, there's just a lot of different things that they've had to kind of undertake over the offseason coming into this season. And they've done a masterful job and have taken over the reins at Chip Ganassi Racing. They're going to try and go back to back here, of course, with Scott Dixon winning last season. So this would be an incredible accomplishment for that organization. So really looking forward to that season wrapping up. Hopefully it's an entertaining one and we have a little bit of drama, but in all honesty, I really want Alex Palou to finish this off because he's well deserving of earning this championship.
I'm perfectly fine with either of them. I don't care who wins it. It's going to be great either way. But I think the great part about it is that you'll have that to watch, but I think you'll also have Rossi versus Herta 2.0 also at the front of the grid. Probably Alexander Rossi has won the last two Long Beach Grand Prix that we've had back in 18 and 19. Yeah. Colton Herta had the advantage at Laguna Seca. He made one mistake. Rossi tried to send it up the inside, ended up ruining his own race. There's a little bit of animosity potentially there when you listen to some of the comments made over the radio immediately after that from Herta's side. We didn't get that kind of Andretti showdown like we were maybe hoping for at Laguna Seca. I'm hoping we get it this weekend because if we can have something happen there where the two of them really go head to head for the first time this season, and then you add Romain Grosjean to that mix into next season, it's going to be a very, very fun mix at Andretti next year.
It's going to be a lot of spiciness over there at Andretti Autosport. And that's why IndyCar is definitely rising up the ranks, at least for me. I know it's been there for you for a long time, but it's slowly but surely starting to gain some traction in terms of my watching experience, which is good. I'm glad to see that they're making the right steps in the right direction with this series. We're having some big names join it and take an invested interest in it. And we have some really, really talented young talents that have shone brightly so far this season. You expect them to carry on that torch for many, many years to come. But let's make some predictions here, Kyle, to round out the episode. Russian Grand Prix, what are you thinking? Pole position, and then, of course, the podium and best of the rest. We'll start off with the qualifying session here on the Saturday. Who takes home pole for the Russian Grand Prix?
Valtteri Bottas has been very, very strong in Sochi over his career. And the last couple of times we've been here, he's been strong through free practice so far. I'll say he continues the streak and gets pole position for the Russian Grand Prix.
I'm going to say Lewis Hamilton gets pole position just because it's going to be in the wet. If it wasn't in the wet, then I would definitely lean Valtteri Bottas, but in the wet, Bottas, it's not his strength whatsoever. This is Hamilton's domain. We'll see what happens, though. I could definitely see a situation where Bottas kind of pulls out a lap and he can get pole, but you very much expect a Mercedes 1-2 in qualifying. Best of the rest here on the Sunday. Going to be interesting. If it's a wet race or a dry race, you could have a lot of different people up here in this kind of mix. But for myself, I'm going to go with Pierre Gasly.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. The AlphaTauri looks pretty strong so far, specifically him. And he's just been super consistent this season. And I think the Italian Grand Prix will leave a little bit of a bitter taste in his mouth. Going to come back here this weekend and show some redemption, look really good in practice results as well. Of course, me looking into practice results very much is the weekly occurrence for Formula One, but hey, I study the numbers a little bit with that, and that's why I'm winning fantasy over here. But for Pierre Gasly, yep, that's exactly why. But Pierre Gasly, I'm going to go with him as best of the rest here.
I'm going to take Lando Norris for best of the rest for this one. The Russian Grand Prix has been a bit of a trouble spot for him in his short career so far, but the McLaren looks like it has some really, really solid pace in terms of qualifying and race pace. So I think that they'll have that track position from the Saturday into the Sunday. And I like Norris, whether it's in the wet or in the dry. So I've got Lando as best of the rest this weekend.
All righty. Who you got as the third place guy on the podium? Do you think Max Verstappen comes from the back and gets on that podium, or do you see somebody else?
I do. I do think that Verstappen will make it back through. I think they've got a good enough car. I think he's a good enough driver there coming from the back, whether it is in the dry, whether it's in the wet, regardless. In the wet, a little bit less so, just because it'll be a bit more difficult with the visibility, maybe trying to push things a little bit too much and maybe making an error, something that we saw last year. I believe it was at Turkey where he spun out there on the curb. Yeah. So maybe a little bit less so if it is the wet weather race, but if it's in the dry, especially, Max Verstappen Verstappen, third step on the podium, making that recovery.
Myself, I don't think he gets there. I think he's going to fall short. It's such a difficult track to overtake. I'm going to say that Lando Norris gets on the podium. I didn't put him
then that's best of the rest.
No. If you're on the podium, you're not best of the rest.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't think you know how best of the rest works. It doesn't matter where you finish. It's about the car you're in.
No. If you make it on the podium, that's its own thing. Best of the rest is whoever's after that. I'm putting like Pierre Gasly in like P5. But Lando Norris, I think he gets on the podium here this weekend, finishes P3. Like all the things that you said, I like him in the wet and I like him in the dry. And he just kind of, I'm not going to say he let Daniel Ricciardo win last weekend, but he was instructed not to pass him. I think he could have if he wanted to mount a charge there. But no, I understand that. But let's
not get too Lando Norris fanboy.
No, okay, fair enough. But I do think Lando Norris is going to get on the podium again this weekend. It's not been the greatest track for him, but he's had some bad luck on that opening lap that has kind of hindered his performances in the past couple of seasons. So I'm going to say that Lando Norris gets P3. Let's get to the top two. It's pretty self-explanatory, the order that we're going with here. Lewis Hamilton's going to win the Russian Grand Prix this weekend, just in a bid to make the championship battle a little bit more tight after this upcoming weekend. And then Bottas in second. I'm sure that's the same for you as well.
Yeah, it's a big weekend if Bottas wants to kind of show what he's got. To be quite honest, if he does want to defy team orders or anything like that, this is the weekend where he could potentially do that. But that being said, he's shown to be loyal to Mercedes, be appreciative of the opportunities he's had there, and is willing to be a team player. We saw that at the Dutch Grand Prix when he led off in the final sector of his fastest lap at the end of the race to make it an easier lap to set for Lewis Hamilton to get at that extra point for the championship. If he did that, then even with the announcement's official now, I don't see why he wouldn't have Lewis go through for the victory if it's kind of close. If he has like a big gap or anything like that, that's a different story. But I don't think that'll be the case. And I do think that we'll get some kind of team order stuff if Bottas is in front. So I've got Hamilton winning this weekend as well.
Yeah, I would be shocked, honestly, if Bottas does go through with the victory this weekend. If Hamilton has no issues and he's in a position, a big
enough gap, and then there's a big question about whether he'd be able to do that.
Yeah, I think if it's in the wet, Hamilton may even pass him on track, and they don't even need to do anything with that.
Yeah, if it's a wet weather race over the race distance, yeah, I've got Hamilton by probably a lap over everybody else, just given Verstappen starting at the back. But in qualifying, I could potentially see Bottas getting up there, just given how good he's been at this track and how well it kind of suits his driving style, even if it is in the wet, and how inconsistent he's been in the wet. But over the race distance, yeah, if it's in the wet, Lewis Hamilton for sure.
Definitely. All righty. That does it for F1. Quickly on the IndyCar finale here, Kyle. Championship prediction. I think we all know where we're going with that one. But for the race victor, who you got winning the season finale here at Long Beach on Sunday?
So I've got Alex Palou winning the championship. Just a solid day, nothing too crazy for him. A solid top 10 finish. Pato O'Ward does his best, but I think that he's going to have too much competition to go out there and maximize points. So I think it's going to be a somewhat anticlimactic championship finale, but in terms of the race, I'm really excited to see what we can get, not just from the front runners, but it's also the first time that Jimmy Johnson gets to go to the Long Beach Grand Prix in an IndyCar, which is pretty damn cool as well. But in terms of the race winner, I do think that we'll get it from the Andretti stable. I do think that we'll get a nice fun battle between Colton Herta and Alexander Rossi, but I do think Colton Herta will go back-to-back to finish off the season.
Okay, I'm going to say that the guy that technically still has a shot at the championship, Joseph Newgarden, goes out there and wins this weekend at Long Beach, finished second here last time out in 2019. So I think that he's got a pretty good shot. If he wants to keep himself within a championship contention, then he's going to have to go out there and perform. Maybe he goes up with a race victory, but I as well have Alex Palou securing the IndyCar championships. Just been a masterful drive all season long from the Spanish driver, and Chip Ganassi Racing has been well deserving of a championship here this season. Just has to keep it clean, like we've said throughout the episode. But that'll do it in terms of the predictions and the news and notes for today's episode. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? A quickie version, I guess, of the green flag, a little bit shorter than what we're used to.
No, nothing too much to add. A fun weekend coming up. with, of course, we expect a wet weather race, hopefully for the Russian Grand Prix, which we thought we were going to get for Belgium, and then we know how that went. So hopefully we get an actual wet weather race, because we haven't really had that much this season. And then for IndyCar, just wrapping up the season, hoping for a nice clean race, a fun battle at the front of the grid. Getting back to Long Beach is great. We're hoping to do that earlier in the season. Of course, that wasn't feasible. So go in there for the finale and really enjoy it, because it's going to be a damn long time until we get back for IndyCar. And then once we do, we'll have to wait another month until the next race after that. Gotta love that IndyCar schedule.
Yeah, I wish we had more action for that series, because it is truly on the rise, it seems, in terms of popularity. And people's interest in it is definitely being noted. I'm hopeful.
I mean, at least for myself, I find it to be the most interesting championship across the three major ones. You've got a big interest in terms of the schedule and how diverse it is, looking at street courses, road courses, ovals as well. You look at the cars and how difficult they are to drive. They have no power steering versus the other two big series which do. So it's much more physical for the drivers as well. You look at the grid and all the different nations you have represented. It's one of the more diverse driver grids in terms of the nationalities represented. When you look at NASCAR only being Americans except for one, and then a little bit different for F1, kind of being similar there. Although for IndyCar, you do have more North American representation there. And then the biggest factor is that you go into every race weekend and you don't know who's going to be at the front. You don't know who's going to challenge for the championship going into the year, all these kind of things. And so the 17 races is nice, but I'd like a bigger schedule. I'd like going to more things. And the big layoff is really disappointing, and having to wait basically 2 months into the season to even have the season start, because you've got 2 races in the first 2 months. So it's frustrating in that regard, but when it's here, it's a great championship, and hopefully a fun ending to the season coming up at Long Beach.
Absolutely. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod, as well as Twitter at The Green Flag Pod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. We'd really, really appreciate it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the YouTube video. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. Enjoy motorsports action across all 3 series this weekend: NASCAR, F1, and of course, IndyCar wrapping up their season. Going to be an action-packed weekend of racing. So make sure you enjoy it all, and we'll talk to you next week to get you set up for some NASCAR stuff, because there's no more IndyCar after this weekend, but NASCAR is definitely going to be on the channel from here on out until the checker flag falls at Phoenix. So enjoy the racing this weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.